Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Leah Kieo of With Respect, and this is our video series of tips and tools to create meaningful learning experiences. If you remember, we started this journey with a webinar through Training Magazine Network. If you haven't seen that webinar yet, I really advise that you go take a look. That's on our webpage in the upper left-hand corner on the page itself. You'll see the link. Our website is with-respect.com. You'll see that link down below. Today we're going to continue that conversation and we're going to dive into movement because movement is so important. And whether we're teaching children or adults, movement is relevant. As we're sitting here and we're getting ready, what I want you to do is I want you to put your hands together and I want you to rub your hands, right? This is that anticipatory, we're excited, here we go, right? So this is something that I like learners to do before every learning opportunity. What this does for us is not only does it give us an opportunity to really kind of generate some energy in our body and in our hands, but it actually also connects both sides of the brain. If you remember, we talked about why it's relevant. We talked about the fact that when we look at the brain, right, the frontal lobe, which is responsible for our executive functioning, it's responsible for thinking and planning, and it's the part of us that makes us human. And then there's the temporal lobe, which is on the sides, and the parietal lobe, which is kind of in the middle of the back. Those are the parts of the brain that are responsible for learning, recall, and the ability to be able to store, understanding what's coming at you, perception, all of those pieces. Now, if you look in front of the parietal and just behind the frontal lobe, we see that the motor cortex sits right there. That motor cortex, along with the sensory cortex, is what connects all three of those lobes together so that we actually have the entire picture of what we need to learn. So that motor cortex responsible for movement is crucial in learning. So that's one of the major reasons why today we're going to take a deeper dive into what we exactly mean by movement. What kind of movement do we need in order for the brain to be able to activate that motor cortex and do what we need it to do? I have my favorite brain hat, and if you go to our resources page on the for brain science, you'll find the template for this. It's a PDF where you can download it and make your own. For you, for kids in your class, for adults, everybody loves these. You'll see how important the frontal cortex is, and the motor cortex is running right here. This is a really great physical example of that. So what do we mean by movement? Movement is everything from a stationary tap of your pencil, right? Those of us who are pen clickers, right, to the leg shake, all of that is movement. And there's some research that's indicating that that's part of processing. It's part of the brain actually engaging in what's happening in front of it. The other component of movement is that we can be extremely intentional in how we design, okay? We can design activities specifically that are moving people. For example, in our diversity trainings, we often do things that require people to stand up and engage either with vocabulary cards, here's a word and a definition, go find your partner, right? So we're moving around the room, we've got big movement going. We also have smaller movement with different activities that like at a small group table, you can have people stand up, rotate chairs as part of the activity itself. Those are all ways to integrate movement. The other thing to consider is, are there times where we can integrate movement that leads to a break, right? So it might be that this is this activity I want this small group and they're moving around the table and or small space. And by the way, when you're done with the activity, please go take your 10-minute break, right? So building all of those things in. There are specific ways, too, that we can deliver through movement that create the opportunity for people to have memory and recall. I love using where I stand in space, so I can give you a list of different ways to incorporate movement. We have activities, we have movement in between activities, we have movement to take breaks, right? So those are 3 points. Now, anytime then I want to reference, what were we over here? This was our activities, right? So anytime I'm going to talk about activities, I'd return to this space. The other thing that we can also incorporate are fidget toys. There are all kinds of fidget toys. I love looking for these in dollar stores, party stores, all sorts of fun places. And we've come up with a whole myriad. This is a baby Rubik's Cube, right? One of people's favorites is the Slinky, right? This is another one. The important thing about fidget toys is that they're not noise distraction, right? They are movement, okay? So those are all ways that we can incorporate this concept of movement. Sometimes what we find is that we need to add movement kind of on the cuff, right? It's not like we've planned for it, but you know, it's the time period right after lunch when people are nodding off a little or getting squirrely, right? So that's when I can do an impromptu, I can have people stand up. This is a great time, even if I haven't planned it in a small group, to ask a small group to stand up. When we talk about e-learning, there's a level of this that we have to invite people and hope that they take advantage. There are things we can do to incorporate and encourage movement in our e-learners, and you can do this too. There was a download available for you to be able to take notes on as I'm talking. If at the beginning of the video I had said, take that document and place it up into the right-hand corner of your workspace. And then in the process of talking about specific parts, I ask you to reach for it, right? Those are ways to incorporate movement. We can also incorporate movement as part of how we remember things. We can help people do things like, if I have a list, I'm going to say, okay, everybody, hold up your hand. We've got this list of 5 things. Here's what the thumb is, here's the index, right? And as we go through this, then I'm going to repeat that periodically throughout our time together, and I'm going to reinforce that movement. So let's review. We have covered a lot of material and a lot of ground. Getting ready to learn with movement. We've also learned about the importance of movement because it connects all the learning centers of the brain. We've learned examples of how movement benefits learning and the brain. We've learned how to design learning experiences with movement and how to deliver with movement intentionally. We've learned how to maintain engagement through movement and how to increase engagement through movement. Last but not least, we've learned about e-learning and online delivery and how movement can be used. Boy, we've covered a lot of territory, but there's just one more thing. If you've enjoyed what we're doing here, I'd encourage you to connect with us. The rest of the video series will only be available to those who are on our email list. There's a link down below to be able to sign up for that. The other group of people who will have access to that are our YouTube subscribers. So those are 2 avenues by which you can have access to the continued video series. The goal is that we get connected because this is how we learn. This is how we create awesome learning experiences. I'd also love to hear from you about what works for you, both face-to-face learning and e-learning, around this concept of movement. Down below, there's a link to a document that will explain to you exactly why we're doing these videos in the format that we're doing it. I'd be really curious to hear from you about what you think about that, because it's also connected to the brain research. Look forward to hearing from you.